The Endless Night. Chapter 1. The office buzzed with the hum of computers and the low murmur of conversations. Amy sat at her desk, tapping away at her keyboard, her eyes flitting to the clock on her screen. The day had dragged on, filled with endless emails and meetings that seemed to stretch into eternity. But now, as the hands of the clock neared 6, a sense of anticipation quickened her pulse. Tonight, she and her coworkers planned to unwind at their favorite bar, a cozy spot nestled in the heart of the city. It had become a ritual, a way to shake off the stress of the week and lose themselves in the camaraderie and laughter that always flowed freely. Ready to go. Jenny, her closest friend at work, appeared beside her, a bright smile lighting up her face. Amy returned the smile, feeling her spirits lift. Absolutely. I need a drink. They gathered their things, joined by a few other colleagues, and made their way to the elevator. The ride down was filled with light-hearted banter, the shared sense of relief as they left the office behind. Stepping out into the cool evening air, Amy felt a rush of excitement. The city was alive with energy, the streets bustling with people heading to their own Friday night destinations. They walked together, the conversation flowing easily, punctuated by bursts of laughter. The bar was already lively when they arrived, the warm glow of the lights spilling out onto the street. They found a table near the back, and Amy slipped into a seat, savoring the familiar comfort of the place. She ordered a glass of wine, letting the rich, fruity aroma fill her senses as she took her first sip. As the night wore on, Amy felt herself relax, the tension of the week melting away. She chatted with her friends, the conversation shifting from work to weekend plans and everything in between. The bar was crowded, a sea of faces and voices blending into a vibrant place of sound and motion. It was then that she noticed him. He stood at the bar, tall and strikingly handsome, his dark hair and chiseled features catching her eye. There was an air of confidence about him, a magnetic presence that drew her gaze. Their eyes met across the room, and he smiled, a slow, charming smile that sent a thrill through her. Amy felt her cheeks flush, and she quickly looked away, focusing on her drink. But her thoughts kept drifting back to him, the way his eyes had seemed to see right through her, making her heart race. "Someone's got an admirer," Jenny teased, nudging her playfully. Amy laughed, trying to brush it off, but she couldn't deny the flutter of excitement in her chest. "He's just some guy." "Yeah, a really hot guy," Jenny said with a wink. As if on cue, he made his way over to their table. Amy's heart skipped a beat as he approached, his smile widening as he drew closer. "Hi," he said, his voice smooth and warm. "Mind if I join you?" Jenny and the others exchanged amused glances, but Amy found herself nodding, her words catching in her throat. He pulled up a chair and introduced himself as Jack. There was something about him that was immediately captivating, a mix of charm and mystery that made her feel both intrigued and slightly off balance. They talked for a while, the conversation flowing easily. Jack was attentive, his gaze never straying from hers, making her feel like she was the only person in the room. He was witty and engaging, his laugh infectious. Amy felt herself being drawn in, a connection sparking between them that felt almost electric. As the evening wore on, the bar began to thin out. Jack suggested they continue their conversation somewhere quieter, and Amy, caught up in the moment, agreed. They left the bar together, stepping out into the cool night air. They found a small hotel nearby, its neon sign flickering invitingly. Amy's heart raced with a mix of excitement and nervous anticipation as they checked in and made their way to the room. The room was modest but comfortable, the dim lighting casting a warm glow over the space. Jack poured them each a drink from the minibar, and they settled on the bed, their conversation resuming with an intimacy that felt both thrilling and natural. Amy found herself leaning closer, her heart pounding as their faces drew nearer. Then, in an instant, everything changed. Jack's expression shifted, his eyes darkening with a look that sent a chill down her spine. Before she could react, he lunged at her, his hands closing around her throat. Amy's mind reeled with shock and terror as she struggled, her vision blurring as he tightened his grip. She tried to scream, but no sound escaped. The world around her began to fade, the edges of her consciousness slipping away. The last thing she saw was Jack's cold, triumphant smile before everything went black. When Amy opened her eyes, she was back at her desk, the hum of the office surrounding her. She blinked, disoriented, her heart pounding as she looked around. The clock on her screen showed the same time as before, and her coworkers were preparing to leave for the bar. Chapter 2. The office buzzed with the familiar drone of computers, the clatter of keyboards, and the low hum of voices. Amy sat frozen at her desk, her mind a tumultuous whirl of confusion and fear. She had died, she was sure of it. The memory of Jack's hands around her throat, the crushing darkness, was vivid and inescapable. And yet, here she was, back in the office as if nothing had happened. Ready to go. Jenny's voice cut through her thoughts, startling her. Amy looked up, seeing her friend's cheerful face, the same smile she had seen what felt like moments ago. Yeah, Amy replied, her voice shaky. She forced a smile, trying to mask the terror gnawing at her insides. Just a minute. As she gathered her things, Amy's mind raced. Was it all just a terrible nightmare? But the vividness of it, the way her throat still felt sore, told her otherwise. She followed her coworkers to the elevator, her steps heavy with dread. The ride down felt surreal, the same light-hearted banter from her friends a stark contrast to the turmoil inside her. Stepping out into the evening air, Amy felt a sense of déjà vu so strong it made her dizzy. The streets, the people, the sounds, it was all the same. Every detail matched her memories from the night before, as if time itself had rewound. At the bar, Amy could barely focus on the conversation. Her eyes darted around the room, her heart pounding as she scanned for Jack. She felt trapped in a surreal nightmare, every moment a replay of what had already happened. And then she saw him. Standing at the bar, just as before, his dark hair and chiseled features unmistakable. Their eyes met, and Amy's blood ran cold. The charming smile he gave her now seemed sinister, a prelude to the horror she knew awaited. "Amy, are you okay?" Jenny's voice brought her back. Her friend looked at her with concern, noting her pale face and trembling hands. I'm fine," Amy stammered. "I just need some fresh air." She stood up abruptly, nearly knocking over her chair, and made her way to the exit. Outside, she gulped in the cool night air, her mind racing. What was happening to her? How could she be reliving the same night? "Excuse me." A voice behind her made her jump. She turned to see Jack, his face a picture of concern. "Are you all right?" Fear surged through her, and she took a step back. "Stay away from me," she said, her voice trembling. Jack frowned, genuine confusion crossing his face. "I just wanted to make sure you were okay. You seemed upset." Amy's mind was a whirlwind of fear and doubt. What if she was wrong? What if it had all been a dream? But the memory of his hands around her throat was too real to ignore. "I'm fine," she said, her voice firmer now. "I just need to be alone." Jack looked at her for a moment, then nodded. "All right. If you need anything, I'll be inside." He turned and walked back into the bar, leaving Amy standing there, her heart pounding. She couldn't just go back in and pretend everything was normal. Whether it was a dream or a premonition, she had to do something, anything, to stop this nightmare from coming true. Later, as she re-entered the bar, Amy noticed Jack talking to Jenny. Panic surged through her as she saw the familiar scene playing out. Jenny laughed at something Jack said, her guard down, just as Amy's had been. Amy hurried over, trying to intervene. "Jenny, can I talk to you for a second?" she asked, her voice urgent and pulling Jenny away from Jack. Jenny looked surprised but nodded. "Sure, what's up?" I don't think you should go with him," Amy said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I have a bad feeling about him." Jenny frowned. "What are you talking about?" "He seems nice." "Please, trust me," Amy pleaded. "I think he is dangerous." Before Jenny could respond, Jack approached them, his smile still in place but his eyes now cold. "Is everything all right?" Amy's heart raced. Yeah, everything's fine, she said, forcing a smile. We were just about to head home. Jack's gaze lingered on her, a flicker of something dangerous in his eyes. All right. Maybe next time, then. Amy watched as he walked away, relief flooding her. She had done it. She had changed the course of the night. But the relief was short-lived. After walking Jenny home safely, Amy started towards her apartment just a few blocks down the street. From the shadows, a hand clasped tightly around her arm. Frightened, she turned to see Jack, his face twisted in anger. You shouldn't have done that, he hissed. Before she could react, he pulled her into a dark alley, his grip like iron. Fear surged through her as she struggled, but he was too strong. The alley was deserted, her cries for help swallowed by the night. The last thing she saw was his cold, triumphant smile before everything went black. When Amy opened her eyes, she was back at her desk, the hum of the office surrounding her. She blinked, disoriented, her heart pounding as she looked around. The clock on her screen showed the same time as before, and her coworkers were preparing to leave for the bar. A cold, creeping dread settled over her as she realized she was back at the beginning, doomed to relive the nightmare again. Chapter 3. The hum of the office machines felt like a cacophony in Amy's head as she stared at her computer screen, her fingers hovering over the keys. The familiar scene around her, coworkers packing up, the end-of-day banter, was an eerie echo of the previous nights. She knew what would happen next, and the suffocating sense of déjà vu gripped her. Ready to go. Jenny's voice broke through her thoughts. The same words, the same bright smile. Amy's heart raced as she nodded mechanically, gathering her things. She had to do something different. She couldn't let the night play out as it had before. As they walked to the bar, Amy saw it was just as crowded as before, the warm glow of lights casting a familiar haze over the scene. Amy's eyes scanned the room, finding Jack almost immediately. He was at the bar, his gaze sweeping the room until it settled on her. That same charming smile appeared, and Amy's stomach churned with a mix of fear and determination. She decided to keep her distance, watching him from across the room. She couldn't let him get close to her or her friends. She needed to gather information, figure out his patterns, his weaknesses. Amy watched as Jack worked the room, his charm disarming everyone he spoke to. He was smooth, calculated. He seemed to know exactly what to say to put people at ease. As she observed him, she noticed subtle patterns in his behavior, the way his eyes would linger on certain people, the way he moved through the crowd. She needed to do something to break the cycle, but she couldn't do it alone. As the night progressed, Amy moved closer to her friends, determined to keep them safe. When Jack approached their table, she stepped in front of Jenny, her heart pounding in her chest. Hey, Jack said, his eyes locking onto Amy's with that unnerving intensity. Mind if I join you? Amy forced a smile. Actually, we're just about to leave. Jack's eyes flickered with something dark, but he kept his smile in place. Maybe another time, then. As they left the bar, Amy felt a sense of triumph. She had managed to keep Jack at bay, at least for now. But she knew it wasn't over. As they walked down the street, she pulled Jenny aside. Listen, Jenny, I need to tell you something, Amy said, her voice low and urgent. Jenny looked at her with concern. What's going on, Amy? You've been acting strange all night. Amy took a deep breath. I know this is going to sound crazy, but I think I'm stuck in some kind of time loop. Every night, I end up at the bar, and that guy, Jack, he kills me. And then I wake up back at the office, and it all happens again. Jenny's eyes widened with disbelief. Amy, that's insane. Are you sure you're okay? I know it sounds crazy, Amy insisted. But it's real. I've lived through this twice now. I need your help to figure out how to stop it. Jenny stared at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right, I don't understand it, but I believe you. What do we do? Before Amy could respond, a sudden movement caught her eye. Jack emerged from the shadows, a lead pipe in his hand. In a swift, brutal motion, he brought the pipe down on Jenny's head with a sickening thud. Jenny crumpled to the ground, unconscious, but Jack didn't stop. He struck her again and again, his face twisted with rage and a chilling focus. "Stop!" Amy screamed, her voice breaking with horror. "Stop it, please!" But Jack was relentless, the metal pipe rising and falling, splattering blood across the pavement. Amy's world tilted as she watched in paralyzed terror, her friend's lifeless body lying in a pool of blood. Finally, Jack dropped the pipe, panting heavily. He turned to Amy, his smile cold and menacing, like a shark's. "You shouldn't involve others," he said, his voice a sinister whisper. In an instant, he lunged at her, his hands closing around her neck. Amy struggled, her vision blurring as his grip tightened. The world darkened, and the last thing she saw was his cold, triumphant smile. When Amy opened her eyes, she was back at her desk, the hum of the office surrounding her. She blinked, disoriented, her heart pounding as she looked around. The clock on her screen showed the same time as before, and her coworkers were preparing to leave for the bar. A cold, creeping dread settled over her as she realized she was back at the beginning, doomed to relive the nightmare again. This time, as Jenny approached her desk, her face bright with the same cheerful smile, Amy felt a wave of nausea. "Ready to go?" Jenny asked. Amy couldn't take it. She rushed to the bathroom, her stomach heaving. She barely made it to the sink before she vomited, her body racked with sobs. She looked up at the mirror, her reflection a mask of fear and despair. "Why can't I stop this?" she screamed, the sound echoing off the tiled walls. She collapsed to the floor, her body shaking with uncontrollable sobs, tears streaming down her face. In that moment, Amy felt the full weight of her helplessness, the endless cycle of horror crushing her spirit. Chapter 4. Jenny had found Amy in the bathroom at work, a sobbing mess on the floor. Instead of taking her to the hospital, as any sensible person might have, Jenny had agreed to take her home and stay with her. Now, Jenny was in the kitchen, making tea to help calm Amy's nerves. She kept glancing at Amy with concern, her worry etched deeply into her features. Amy sat on the sofa in her small apartment, her body trembling with residual fear. The dim light from the television cast flickering shadows on the walls, but the news offered no comfort. She kept flipping through the channels, hoping to see some emergency report of a murder at the bar or, ideally, news that Jack had been apprehended. Her childhood notion that surviving the night might end the loop was all she had to hold on to. "Are you sure you don't want to talk about what's going on?" Jenny asked gently, bringing a mug of tea to the coffee table in front of Amy. Amy shook her head, unable to tear her eyes away from the TV. "I can't, Jenny. Just, please stay with me tonight. I need you here." Jenny sighed but nodded. "Of course. I'm not going anywhere." She settled into an armchair across from Amy, watching her friend with worried eyes. The night dragged on, each minute feeling like an hour. Amy kept her eyes glued to the screen, waiting for any sign that the nightmare was over. But the news was a repetitive cycle of mundane reports, offering no hope. Then there was a knock at the door. Amy jumped, her heart leaping into her throat. The knock was loud and insistent, echoing through the quiet apartment. Jenny looked over, trying to reassure her. "Relax, Amy. It's probably just the pizza I ordered." She got up and headed for the door, her footsteps soft on the carpet. "Who is it?" she called. There was no answer, just another, more forceful knock. Jenny shrugged and reached for the doorknob, but before she could turn it, the door was kicked in with a violent crash. The impact sent Jenny flying back into the wall, her head snapping back with a sickening thud. Amy screamed, frozen in horror as Jack stepped through the shattered door, a large knife gleaming in his hand. His eyes were cold and filled with murderous intent. He moved with terrifying speed, slashing the knife across Jenny's throat before she could react. Blood sprayed across the wall, and Jenny crumpled to the floor, lifeless. "No!" Amy screamed, her mind unable to process the brutality of what she was witnessing. Jenny. Jack turned to her, his smile a grotesque mockery of the charm he had shown at the bar. I told you not to involve anyone else in our business, Amy, he hissed, his voice dripping with malice. Amy backed away, but there was nowhere to go. Jack lunged at her, his hand closing around her throat with a vice-like grip. She struggled, her vision blurring as his grip tightened, cutting off her air. How do you know my name? She managed to choke out, her voice barely a whisper. Jack's smile widened. You'll never escape me, Amy. You're mine. The world faded to black, and the last thing Amy felt was the searing pain in her lungs as she gasped for breath. When she opened her eyes, she was back at her desk, the hum of the office surrounding her. She blinked, disoriented, her heart pounding as she looked around. The clock on her screen showed the same time as before, and her coworkers were preparing to leave for the bar. A cold, creeping dread settled over her as she realized she was back at the beginning, doomed to relive the nightmare again. This time, as Jenny approached her desk, her face bright with the same cheerful smile, Amy felt a wave of nausea. Ready to go? Jenny asked. Amy couldn't take it. She rushed to the bathroom, her stomach heaving. She barely made it to the sink before she vomited, her body racked with sobs. She looked up at the mirror, her reflection a mask of fear and despair. Why is this happening to me? She screamed, the sound echoing off the tiled walls. A sudden thought struck her, cutting through her despair like a knife. How did Jack know her name? How did he know where she lived? He shouldn't have known any of those details. Unless... Her blood ran cold as the realization hit her. What if Jack was also aware of the loop? What if he was caught in it too, just like her? Chapter 5. Amy stood in front of the mirror in her office bathroom, splashing cold water on her face. Her reflection stared back at her, eyes wide with fear but also burning with a newfound determination. She had to confront Jack, had to get answers, even if it meant facing death again. She couldn't let this nightmare continue without understanding why it was happening. Jenny's voice called behind her, Amy, are you ready to go? Taking a deep breath, Amy forced herself to remain calm. She needed Jenny to stay safe, needed everything to play out as it had before, at least until she could get Jack alone. She walked back into the living room, managing a shaky smile. Yeah, let's go. The walk to the bar felt surreal, a strange mix of familiarity and impending doom. Amy's mind was racing, but she kept her demeanor composed, not wanting to arouse Jenny's suspicions. Inside the bar, everything was the same, laughter, clinking glasses, the warm glow of the lights. Amy spotted Jack immediately. He was at the bar, his eyes sweeping the room until they landed on her. That same charming, sinister smile curved his lips. This time, she didn't wait for him to approach. She strode over, her heart pounding in her chest. Buy me a drink, she demanded, her voice low but laced with anger. Jack raised an eyebrow, clearly taken aback by her boldness, but then his smile widened. Of course. What would you like, my dear? Whiskey. Neat, she replied, sitting down beside him. They both sat in silence, their drinks in front of them, not looking at each other but at the glasses on the bar. After what felt like an eternity, Jack let out a sigh. Are you going to ask your questions, or should I just kill you now so we can do this all over again? Amy's hands trembled slightly, but she forced herself to speak. Why? Jack took a slow sip of his drink, then set it down. I don't know the answer to that. Frustration bubbled up inside her. Who did this to us? Was it you? Jack shook his head. It wasn't me. I don't know who or what caused this. Amy clenched her fists, turning to face him. Then what do you know? Why are you killing me over and over? Jack rubbed his eyes, his demeanor calm, almost sympathetic. Do you even remember what happened before this day? What did you do the day before this loop started? Who are your parents? Where did you go to school? Amy opened her mouth to answer, but nothing came out. She couldn't remember. Beyond this one night repeating endlessly, she had no memory of anything else. Panic welled up inside her. Jack reached out, gently holding her hand. "I don't know any more than you do," he said softly, his tone surprisingly gentle. "If that's your friend over there," he continued, nodding toward Jenny, "how come you can't tell me how you two met or if you went to the same school?" Amy's mind reeled, trying to grasp the truth of what Jack was saying. Tears welled up in her eyes, and Jack handed her a napkin, his touch unexpectedly tender. She accepted it, dabbing at her eyes. Jack took another sip of his whiskey and continued. "I've killed everyone in this bar over 1,000 times, maybe more. At first, it was almost a paradise. I could do anything. But then it turned into a hell. Killing the same people over and over became boring. They were predictable, their deaths meaningless." Amy was stunned, trying to process his words. "But you're a killer, you enjoy it, you bastard. You get to kill over and over." Jack shook his head. "It's not just the act of killing. It's the moment when their eyes go blank, their last breath escaping. That used to be beautiful to me. But after a while, it became hollow, just a repetitive cycle. Then you changed everything, Amy. You woke up." He turned to her, his eyes gleaming. "When I saw you across the room that night, I knew something had changed. Your eyes had a spark, a consciousness that wasn't there before. You even smiled at me, something you never did. For the first time in ages, I felt alive. Killing you isn't just a routine anymore, it's an experience, because you remember. You're special, Amy. You became my angel in this hell." Amy's voice trembled with rage. "You're sick." Jack chuckled, toasting her with his glass. "You're right. I am sick. But I accepted that a long time ago." Amy stood up abruptly, her mind reeling. This was her hell now, along with this psychopath. She grabbed her drink and threw it in his face. "I will escape this someday, no matter how long it takes. And I will kill you." Jack sat there, the whiskey dripping off his face, his expression calm. He didn't even wipe it away. Instead, his grin spread wider. "Maybe you will, Amy," he said, taking another sip of his drink. "But not tonight." Jack's voice turned stern and bone-chilling as he said his last words to Amy. Terrified, Amy rushed out of the bar. Jenny saw her and ran after her, calling out, "Amy, wait! What's going on?" Jack watched them leave, his smile wicked. He tossed a large tip onto the bar, and the bartender handed him a napkin. "Are you okay?" the bartender asked. "Yes," Jack replied calmly, wiping the drink from his face. "She's just a little upset I'm not spending enough time with her. My wife tells me that all the time too," the bartender said with a chuckle. At the door, Jack paused and glanced over his shoulder, seeing the bar filled with people who were sleepwalking and unaware of what was happening. He had been alone in this nightmare loop for so long, but now he had Amy. His muse and angel. He smiled brightly, taking a deep breath, savoring the twisted sense of companionship. "Round and round we go," he muttered to himself, chuckling as he walked out the front door to find his angel. The end. For now.